Okay, the last recording froze, so I had to trim it a little bit. So I'm going to pick up where I left off. We had someone eating food, a survivor eating food, too much food, and it made him sick, if you guys remember where we left off. Here they had all the food they wanted and more than what was good for some of them. The boys especially could not resist it. Bill Hook, one of Jacob Donner's stepsons, became so sick from overeating that he could not go on with the others in the morning. He got at the supplies during the night. I caught him at it. I'll stay with him until Woodworth's party comes along, Bill Murphy offered. Bill had good reason for wanting to stay. He had frozen his toes. Virginia knew how painful that was. Her own feet were in bad shape from frostbite, but she kept on for 2 or more days of walking until at last they reached Mule Springs, where green grass was growing between the patches of snow. After being trapped in the snow for 5 months, when you saw grass, you probably would have just fallen on the ground and been hugging, rolling in the grass with enthusiasm. "Look at all the horses," cried Jimmy as soon as they came in sight of the camp. Virginia looked and then she stared. Were those beautiful California horses really there, or was this a mirage like those she used to see back on the desert? The horses were grazing as peacefully as her own Billy once grazed on the flower-studded prairie in those faraway days when she used to go botanizing with Aunt Tam. She stood with clasped hands watching them. A boy she had never seen before spoke to her in a Spanish accent. "You are in love, no?" "No," she replied, laughing at him. There was plenty of activity and laughter around the camp, and plenty of boys, too. The camp itself was a simple brush shed, built by young George Tucker, who now told his father that he had set forks in the ground, laid poles across it, and covered it with cedar boughs. "I'm proud of you, son," Captain Tucker said. "I guess it was a little lonesome, though, until Woodworth's party came in." "It sure was," the boy said. Another boy with him kept staring at Virginia. It bothered her until she learned that he was a half-wit who stared at everybody like that. He had been George Tucker's only companion after the horses were unpacked and taken to Johnson's ranch. That's where Eddie and the rest of the snowshoers came in. Also, he was probably staring at her because she was starving, right? And she probably looked like a skeleton with skin stretched on her body. "You people look healthy next to them." Harriet Ritchie said she really did stare when she first saw Eddie. After that, she started to bawl. He was a pitiful sight, all right. It didn't take us long to fatten him up, though. One of the boys who had been at Johnson's finished. "The Ritchies, they are emigrants from the States," the young Spaniard explained. "They live at Johnson's rancho. You will go to Rancho del Paso. The alcalde himself will take you in." Virginia had no idea what an alcalde was, but she didn't ask. These boys seemed almost too eager to answer her questions. She could understand the Indians wanting to buy her when she was all dressed up for her birthday, riding her pony and in radiant good health. But now, what could they possibly see in the pale scarecrow that she had become? The Graves girls and even Elitha Donner were surrounded by admirers. "Women must be scarce in California," she told her mother. "That Spaniard over there thought I was in love with him, but it was really the horses." "Whose horses are they, Ma?" "I believe they're ours, dear," Mrs. Reed replied. "Mr. Woodworth's relief party got this far. I just spoke to him, and he says the good people of California have given us these horses and warm clothing, and I don't know what all. That's Mr. Woodworth over there having his feet rubbed. They trusted him to take care of us, but it looks as if we ought to reverse the order of things and take care of him." "He ought to see your feet if he thinks that his are frostbitten." "That's all right, Ma. I won't have to walk on them now that we have horses," Virginia said. Jimmy was so excited about his horse that he could hardly wait until the next morning to mount him. There weren't enough horses to go around. Virginia found that she would have to ride on a mule, but she didn't care. Riding on anything was restful after all that walking. There weren't enough saddles or bridles either. "You have to choose either one or the other," Mrs. Reed was told. "I'll take the bridle," she decided. "You sit up here in front of me and guide the horse, Jimmy. We'll both ride bareback and let Mrs. Keysburg have a saddle." "How can she guide her horse?" Jimmy asked a little later when they were on their way with the boys walking beside them. She can't, giggled Virginia. George Tucker said he would follow along with the others, but I guess horses have ideas of their own. The trail they were taking wound downhill through cedar, pine, and live oak trees until it came at last into the broad valley of the Sacramento. It was like coming from winter into spring. The trip was filled with fun and laughter. Poor Mrs. Keseberg, who had so lately lost both her children, was laughing too. Her horse kept leaving the trail to graze under the trees or to nibble at the flowers that soon appeared in great profusion. Once he nearly brushed her off his back. "Ach, nein, I will kill myself," she exclaimed as she ducked under a low-hanging branch and called out for someone to save her. The boys came bounding to her assistance. Virginia laughed and laughed. Only a girl snatched back from death could have enjoyed life as she did that afternoon. Before the ride was over, her admirer of the day before proposed marriage, and that seemed funny too. "It looks as though I shan't have much trouble finding myself a husband in California," she said afterwards to kind Mrs. Sinclair, who had opened her home and her heart to the survivors, now being brought in from the mountains. So this is very true. There were generally a lot more men than women in California. And this is before the gold rush. So once the gold rush happened, I forgot what the proportion was, but not a lot of women came with the gold rush. And so there were thousands of men that were in California. And if you were a woman, everybody was interested in you because there were a lot of men and not a lot of women. So, you probably had, if you were of an age to be married, you probably had, 20, 30 men that would be like, hello there. Right? So there were tons. This is before the gold rush, and there were still more men to women in California. Let's see. Some were left at Johnson's Ranch and some at the Sinclairs, and the rest were ferried across the American River to Sutter's Fort, now called Fort Sacramento. All were American now, and so were the emigrants who had believed that they were coming to Mexico. "Things are changing a little too rapidly to suit Captain Sutter," Mrs. Sinclair explained as she made her guests comfortable. His and many other dreams of empire were ending, including those of Lansford W. Hastings. Instead of making friends and followers as Captain Sutter had done, the Donner tragedy was making him bitter enemies. Among them was Alcalde Sinclair, who was now taking refugees from Hastings' mistaken leadership into his home at Rancho del Paso until they could establish themselves elsewhere in the new territory of California. An administrator of justice, Mr. Sinclair, still held the old Spanish title of alcalde, meaning a commander of a fortress or a castle. To Virginia, his home seemed better than a castle. She went about touching things that reminded her of her old home back in Illinois. She had almost forgotten how nice a real home could be. There were books, magazines, and newspapers to read. For the first time, Virginia realized their story had made the headlines. "Look, Ma," she exclaimed, picking up a newspaper that lay on the table in Mrs. Sinclair's cheerful sitting room. "This tells about us. It says a company of 20 men left here for the California mountains with provisions, clothing, and horses to bring out the suffering emigrants now there. The citizens of Yerba Buena," that's San Francisco used to be called Yerba Buena. Yerba Buena is the Spanish word for mint. And apparently all of San Francisco, all the hills in San Francisco were covered in mint. So the Spaniards called it mint instead of San Francisco. The citizens of Yerba Buena subscribed about $1,500 for their relief. "Is that charity?" "We'll have to depend on the charity of others for a little while, dear." "But it says here that Mr. Greenwood, an old mountaineer, went with the company as a pilot. He wasn't with Pa when we met him. What happened to him?" "He must have backed out just as Mr. Woodworth did. It was easier for your father to raise money than volunteers who were willing to go into the deep snow with him," said Mrs. Sinclair. Many important people had given money for their rescue. Virginia saw the names of General Vallejo and Lieutenant Maury at the head of a subscription list from Napa and Sonoma, and surely the people of Yerba Buena and San Jose had contributed generously. So a lot of people helped to get them rescued, to buy all the food, to get people to go up, to hike up there and bring them home. So we will stop right there. We have only a little ways more to go. So thank you for joining me. We still have to find out about Patty and Tommy. So you have to watch the next video. Thanks for joining me.